Welcome to another effed up revenge story. This is a slightly longer story, so sit back, relax, grab a drink, and enjoy the show. This story is from Reddit user ProudFisherman5233. Tried to sexually harass my grandma? You might take back a nub. Recently learned about the revenge subreddits and have been enjoying some of the stories. As I've pondered things, I figured I'd share a few tales myself. This first tale involves my grandmother. So let me start this by saying that yes, I'm on mobile and English is my. I think he meant English is not my first language, so please be harsh if you see any errors. And that is why I made some liberal corrections myself. So if what you read and what you hear is different, you know why. Also, OP says English isn't his first language, but then he starts using some words that I rarely hear. So I'll try my best to explain those as well. Background: early 60s, medium sized Midwestern city in a local neighborhood bar. The title of this story comes from my grandma's old saying. See, my grandma always carries a switchblade in her purse for protection, and she said if anyone ever tried to attack her, they might get her, but she's gonna take a piece of them, hence her term, I'll take back a nub. Some context about my grandma before we get into story time. My grandma was born in the deep south back in the 30s. That would make her at least 90 years old this year. Am I right? Yeah. 90 years old. She was one of four sisters who I will refer for the rest of this as the Four Sisters. My family decided to migrate up to northern Midwest city in the 50s. Just for clarification, my family is African American, so if you know anything about US history, you would understand why they would want to escape the Deep South during this time period. My grandma was 20-something when she moved north with her husband, who's my grandfather. The rest of her family, her sisters, mother, and uncle also moved up north. Because of housing discrimination, my grandparents were forced to live in the quote-unquote black neighborhood. The rest of the family also lived in this neighborhood and were basically within walking distance of each other. The thing to know about the Four Sisters was that they were all Spitfires. To those who don't know, Spitfire means quick-tempered or highly emotional person. They are some of the most caring women you can know and were all excellent mothers and grandmothers, but they were not to be trifled or messed with. And if you crossed one of them, that might be your last. This was especially true of my grandmother, who was all of 5'1" and fairly petite. The Four Sisters were quite the characters, and it didn't take the neighborhood long to know of these four sisters because of their crazy antics. They also loved hanging together on the weekends, either at one of their houses or sometimes at the local watering hole. On this particular night, my grandma wanted to go out for a few hours with her sisters. Only one could go, my third aunt. My uncle, my grandma's oldest son, was in charge of watching his siblings for a few hours on this lovely Saturday night, as my grandma dressed to the nines and headed down about half a mile to the local bar to meet up with her sister. This was a pretty small bar that got a lot of regulars. My grandma had been there dozens of times and has plenty of stories to tell about her time there with her sisters and also with my grandfather. My grandma and aunt are lounging in the bar, having a couple drinks and cracking some jokes with some of the regulars when a guy enters the bar. This guy's name is Leroy. He was a regular as well. To picture this guy, he's about as skinny as Jimmy Walker and about the height of Kevin Hart. Combine this and making about the age of 40 and you'll have Leroy. Leroy was a regular at the bar too, but then again, Leroy was a regular at almost every bar in town. You see, kids, before the internet, online dating apps and hookup sites, the way most people met was at bars. Our good friend Leroy was notorious for wanting to have one-night rendezvous with the ladies at the bar. Well, everyone knew his game, and after he has had a few one-night stands with some of the ladies in the neighborhood, most now avoided him like the plague. This, of course, didn't stop him from going to bars on weekends, trying his best to shoot his shot and hoping a lovely filly might come home with him for the night. This guy's trying so hard to get a match, but pretty much everyone had already swiped left on his profile. Oh, and filly means a female horse, but in this context, it's referred to a young girl instead. Yeah, that's what it means. Anyways, Leroy had flirted with my grandma and aunt on previous occasions, and even though he was told that they were both happily married, he kept trying to have conversations with them. As soon as he entered, he once again strolled over there trying to see if he could get some action with either of them. My grandma quickly told him not to waste his breath, but he sat down anyway. What surprised my grandma was that behind Leroy was another dude. He was well over 6 feet tall and handsome. My grandma honestly couldn't recall this guy's name, so we'll call him Jerk. My grandma knew right away that this Billy D. Williams wannabe was gonna try to sweet talk and charm his way into some lady's pants that night, and he had set his sights on his first target, which would be, of course, my grandmother and my aunt. It seems like our good friend Leroy was gonna try to be the jerk's wingman. He started off some small talk to my grandma, telling her how gorgeous she was. Something about him getting lost in her eyes and all that nonsense. And my grandma said that he had diarrhea of the mouth. And pretty much she let what he said go on one ear and out the other. Diarrhea of the mouth. I'm gonna start using those words myself. My grandma quickly shut this clown down and let him know she wasn't interested. So then he set his sights on my aunt. Now, my aunt can take care of herself. However, my grandma was always a little protective of her. Jerk made a comment about how nice my aunt's thighs were as he looked lustfully at her. My grandma quickly told this fool that my aunt was married and not interested in his nonsense. This is where the story changes and revenge comes into place. Oh, here it comes. I'm gonna try to write this dialogue as best as she recalls it. Grandma. She's not interested and she's happily married. Jerk says, she can speak for herself. Jerk turns back to Aunt and says, your legs must be tired because you've been running through my mind all night. Yep, this fool used the pickup line. Man, pickup lines back then were so cringy. I give it like I don't know, 3 out of 10. Grandma replies, are you hard of hearing or something? Or a little slow? I told you she's married and not interested. Jerk says, bitch. My voice cracked. Okay. Alright, let's try again. Bitch, you talk too much. Maybe I'll put my dick down your throat. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where shit got real. Yes, everybody else in the bar knew you wouldn't and shouldn't talk to my grandma that way. She didn't stand for that nonsense. This is one of those times where you could actually hear a pin drop as everyone got quiet. My grandma exploded with an unexpected, what the fuck did you just say? Anyways, my grandma was seething with anger, but Jerkface played it off, and that wasn't a good idea. My aunt knew it was about to go down, so she grabbed my grandma and started leading her to the door. You see, my sister knew what many other people knew, and that is, my grandma kept a 38 snub-nose revolver in her purse, and typically kept a very sharp switchblade wrapped up in her bra. This dude messed with the wrong girl. My aunt tried leading my grandma out of the bar to avoid any more confrontation, but my grandma wasn't having it. As she was being pushed out the door by my aunt and another male customer, my grandma seized a nearby beer glass and flung it towards the jerk. Fortunately, the glass didn't hit him and instead shattered close to his feet, but it certainly got his attention. This well over 6 foot tall, 200-pound man jumped out of his chair and stormed towards my grandma, saying that he will kick her ass. My grandma replies, bring it on, huh? Bring it on! She eventually gets outside and he decides to join her. He's a little apprehensive because a couple of the neighborhood bar dudes had gotten up to see this, and he's afraid that they might get involved. You know, since it's unacceptable for a man to hit a woman and all that jazz. The guys said they're not gonna do anything and just wanted to watch. My grandma quickly pulls out the switchblade she had in her bra, unwrapped it from the paper, and looked him in the eyes and said, come on, motherfucker. You would think that at this point, any civilized person might just apologize for the crude language he used earlier, or you would think that the guy, seeing that my grandma had heels on, might just walk away knowing she's probably not gonna chase after him. Do you think this clown chose either option? If you said he chose neither option, then you would be correct. Now here's your reward. With a woman armed with a switchblade bearing down on him, he decides to stand his ground and doubles down again by calling my mother a bitch and telling her he's going to beat her ass. He next starts putting up his fist and gets ready to go to town. No worries, no one says my grandma has to fight fair. You see, what this clown forgot was my aunt. While Jerkface has his fists up getting ready to start striking like his Mike Tyson, my aunt conveniently took off one of her high heel shoes. She then proceeds to use the heel to bash him right in the shoulder blades. Of course, the staggers are young Jerk. He then turns to see my aunt screaming obscenities at him. This gave my grandma enough time to get near the jerk and slice this fool right in the side. And that's when he knew he effed up. The young jerk howls in pain. And my grandma says to him, maybe I should slice something else off. Jerk staggers sideways, looking at two infuriated women, one with her high heels still in her hand, and the other with a switchblade with his blood on it. Don't worry, he wasn't hurt too badly as she sliced him and not stabbed him. By this time, a few other people are stepping in and are trying to calm the situation down, and Jerk left the scene. The aftermath. My grandmother heard from the others that the jerk went to the hospital and got treatment for getting sliced on the side. This was the 60s, so no cops were called, and if they had been called, they probably would have been slow getting to the scene. No idea what he told the hospital staff and doctors, but regardless, I heard he got patched up and was no worse for wear. Rumors has it that he ended up moving to Chicago a few months later. He never tried to get revenge on my grandma for this, so there's that. Initially, my grandma wasn't gonna tell my grandfather about what happened. You see, my grandfather was a long haul trucker and was out of town when this event happened. But you know how things quickly go through the grapevine. So, of course, he scolded her for this. But she just gave him a wicked smile. She said that the asshole deserved it and that he came at her, so it was self defense anyway. Not sure that's entirely true, but that's what she's sticking with. My grandma continued going to that bar every once in a while. It was a bit of a legend. As for our friend Leroy, he ended up being the epitome of a deadbeat dad. Rumor has it that he has something like 10 kids with 8 or 9 different women. My grandma still has the switchblade, and yeah, she showed it to me. It's somewhere in her massive collection of items now. Otherwise, I'd attach a picture of it. I also learned that my grandma is a woman of her word because she actually took back a nub in the form of an ounce of flesh from this asshole. Wait, an ounce of flesh? Isn't that like a lot of flesh? Poor guy. Hopefully you enjoyed this story about my grandma. She has told this story a few times. However, she was still a little fuzzy on a couple of details as she's in her 90s now. But I'll do my best to answer any questions. And that is it for today's story, people. I hope OP's grandmother is doing well. She seems like an awesome lady. It's funny how there's such a parallel between dating back then and dating nowadays. And alright, that's gonna be it for me for this episode. Now, if you have your own story, it doesn't have to be a dating story, entitled story, any story really. Send it over to iveeffedup@gmail.com. Links to the post are down in the description below. And remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell button. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!